How broken is Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic on the Nintendo Switch? I'm going to talk about all of that today. We're going to go through the performance, the visuals, the game itself, and just everything I'm feeling about it overall after playing it for a few hours. I'm going to be showing some gameplay, not cut very much, of the first probably hour or so. I don't want to get too far to spoil it for some people, but here we go. We're going to talk about it. Now, first of all, there's a little bit of an elephant in the room, and you probably already know what it is, but maybe you don't, so I'll explain it now. I made a main channel video where I played every single Five Nights at Freddy's game on the Nintendo Switch roughly 2 weeks ago, and I played all the games, shared my opinions, my feelings, and at the very end of it, I said, hey, Secret of the Mimic isn't out on the Nintendo Switch. They usually wait at least a year before they release this game on the Switch platforms, and it always just takes a long time for them to put these games on the Switch itself. So I was thinking, you know what, I'm gonna upload this video because, you know, the movie's coming out and there's so much hype around the games right now, so I'm just gonna play them all and I'm gonna get them out before the movie comes out. And I did that, and less than 2 weeks later, Secret of the Mimic was revealed and shadow dropped on the Nintendo Switch. There was they literally said nothing about the game. They just shadow dropped it. Oh my goodness. Why are they shadow dropping these games? I absolutely hate when these big companies do this to games. Obviously, I like it. I like that they shadow dropped it. Now I can play it. But come on, you couldn't have at least announced it before? So as a content creator and as someone who literally did a video on every single Five Nights at Freddy's game on the Switch, and I did the video and then I put so much work into that video and then I uploaded it, and less than 2 weeks later the friggin' game releases on the Switch. Oh yeah, that was just kind of annoying. There's a part of me that just wants to re-upload the video with that section at the end, but I'm gonna give you this video instead. I'll put it in the pinned comment and everything. Oh my goodness. It's just, I don't understand. I don't get why they released or shadow dropped these games. Like, hype it up a little bit more. And because they shadow dropped these games, I've seen nobody talking about this game. There's only one video I saw online of someone playing it briefly. And I mean, I guess it's good for me because I'm the one that I can now talk about it. And if people are interested in it, you have this video now. But I just find it so crazy. And I don't understand really the marketing scheme behind shadow dropping a fairly big game. This isn't a small franchise. This is very popular. And for them to just shadow drop a game on the Switch, it's just weird. They've done this with other Five Nights at Freddy's games in the past. They shadow drop them, and I guess that's just what they do on the Switch versions. So overall, it is weird that they are dropping these massive Five Nights at Freddy's games on the Switch randomly, and there's no hype around it, but I guess it's just what they do. I really don't understand why they do that. They've got to be putting some money into these games. Regardless, it's on the Switch, and we got to talk about it now. Anyways, if you've seen my video on Five Nights at Freddy's on the Switch, you might know that the first half of the Five Nights at Freddy's releases were kind of like pretty bad. Help Wanted on the Switch one was unplayable, and it felt really, really lazy. But then later on in the Switch one's life, they probably noticed that, oh, Five Nights at Freddy's is actually a pretty big franchise on the Switch. We should probably put a little bit more effort into it. And when they released Help Wanted 2, they actually made these games very optimized and playable. Now, I went back and played them all on the Switch 2, and almost every performance issue with Help Wanted 1 and a lot of the other Five Nights at Freddy's games were pretty much fixed. The Switch 2 was able to brute force its way past a lot of the problems. So, that being said, port quality-wise, Secret of the Mimic actually has a pretty quality port comparatively to some past ports. They obviously learned that porting them to the Switch was very important, and they spent their time and they ported this game, Secret of the Mimic, to the Nintendo Switch 1 very well. So thank you. They ported it very well, but there are some issues with it still. But first, before I talk about that, let me talk about some of the other game aspects of it. Like, how do I like it compared to other Five Nights at Freddy's games? Well, this is a very different feeling Five Nights at Freddy's game compared to some others. You're not just sitting in a hallway looking at stuff. There's not like a VR element to it either. This is I guess one of the most unique feeling Five Nights at Freddy's games yet. I would say it probably closely compares to Security Breach because you're like walking around a big area, but this feels a little bit more linear. If you've played Poppy Playtime, I would say that's probably the most comparable game to it that we've seen yet, and I like it. I like those kind of horror games. They're like very puzzle-esque, and this game is absolutely like Poppy Playtime, I think, the most. And let me just say now, I think that's a good thing. I think it's very good. There were some parts in Security Breach where I would get a little bit lost. I'd be walking around for maybe a little bit too much time. Even in Poppy Playtime, I know we're not talking about Poppy Playtime specifically, but there was a lot of time in Poppy Playtime where I had no clue what to do. But with Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic, I feel like it's linear in the way that it's pretty easy to figure out where to go, how to solve puzzles. Some of them aren't as easy, but it's like, it's a good feeling when you're able to figure out a puzzle. And I think overall the action scenes in it are very entertaining. There's a lot, you can just tell that this is a quality game and that they put a lot more effort onto making this feel a lot more atmospheric and spooky. I gotta just say, this game is spooky. It's actually scary. I usually play these games, any horror games, on stream with people, but I decided that this time I wasn't gonna do that. I was gonna play it by myself, just by myself. I wasn't gonna talk to anyone. I was just gonna lock in and I was going to play it like how games are meant to be played. And I gotta say, it got my heart beating a little bit. Maybe I'm just a baby, which is definitely a possibility, but it actually got my heart racing a little bit. The animatronics, or the puppet people that are just kind of around the building that you're walking past, they're kind of spooky. They're kind of creepy, and they could walk around at any point. Oh my goodness, it's just but it's good. Like, I like the story. I like the overall vibes of the game. It's actually it's a nice little difference. And also, it's kind of weird in the sense that it's not really pulling from a lot of the other Five Nights at Freddy's games. And what I mean by that is, like, Freddy, Chica, Bonnie aren't the main animatronics that are trying to hunt you down and kill you. This is like, they're trying to expand the Five Nights at Freddy's series a little bit, which I think is pretty good. Now, don't get me wrong. I think, the Freddy and the gang are the staple animatronics to this game, but I think they pulled off not using those characters as much. Not that there's none of those characters, but they're definitely less prevalent in this game. Now, this is actually my first time playing this game, and I'll be honest, I didn't really know much about it until I made that Five Nights at Freddy's video a few weeks ago, and I just didn't expect it to be as quality as it was. I don't really know. The overall art direction with the atmosphere and, all that stuff, I think it's really good. It's a really quality game, as I've said. And then, of course, if you're a lore lover, if you like the FNAF lore, there's definitely some good chunks here. But we're all here for the Switch version of the game. We're all here to know and understand how it runs, how it feels, how it looks on the Nintendo Switch version. So I'll just say it now. I played both the Switch 1 and the Switch 2 version. The gameplay that you're seeing is the Switch 2 version of the game. And there are already some very noticeable differences between the Switch 1 and the Switch 2 version. Not crazy to the point where I would say it's necessary to play it on the Switch 2 version, but I'll tell you some things that I like about the Switch 1 and the Switch 2 version. So first, I'll talk about the Switch 2 version because it overall is just a better experience. I gotta say that, of course, as I mentioned earlier, they just optimize these games very well for the Switch. One thing I instantly noticed was the HD rumble that it used. I feel like a lot of games, especially third-party games, don't use any sort of haptic features or HD rumble, but these Five Nights at Freddy's games, at least Help Wanted 2 and Secret of the Mimic here, they use the controllers and the hardware very well. On the Switch 2, the load times were pretty snappy. There wasn't any weird hitching or frame rate drops at all. There was this weird little glitch that I don't know if it's a glitch or if it maybe just wasn't loading in properly, where if you move your camera fast enough, it kind of, like, the map isn't quite loaded in yet. And I have a really interesting point in the game where I am kind of like creeping in a doorway and it's just kind of black screen and needs to load in where just in the distance, and you can kind of tell what I mean when I do that. But when you move your camera fast and snappy, that can happen every once in a while, but it's never affected my experience on the Switch 2. But I had no issues running it on the Switch 2. Load times were fast, as I said. Frame rate is fine. It does run at 30 frames per second, which is probably its biggest downgrade, but overall 30 frames per second, at least it's locked on the Switch 2. Now, if you played another version of the game, like on the PS5 or the Xbox or PC, you might already also notice that not only is the frame rate cut down to 30 frames per second, but also the overall visual quality is much lower. The textures are pretty weak overall. There's some signs that are on the wall that you might not be able to even make out or read. The lighting in general isn't as good as these other platforms. The shadows aren't as crisp, and you'll just notice a lot of these visual downgrades in comparison to the other ones. But on its own, if you haven't played the other ones, I found it pretty decent. Like, this is a good port. The fact that this is running on Switch 1 at all is pretty impressive nowadays. It is still spooky. I feel like it's not as spooky as the PS5 version would be, but it is still spooky. And I think that if you only have the Switch 1 or the Switch 2 and you want to play this game, this is a good option. It's a good option. The only weird thing I would say that's gameplay wise would be controlling the the guy's hand that you're using. When you grab onto something, you have to move the hand, which is just kind of odd. This is on all console versions, I would imagine, but that's the only thing that's kind of weird. I got used to it after a while, but that was one of the first things I noticed. Also, putting in your little machine remote thing, it is also a little bit finicky to fully lock on. It feels like in some maybe faster paced sections where you're required to get maybe some levers pushed down, you can't do it as fast because it's just kind of finicky. So there's that. But anyways, let's go to the Switch 1 version because that's where it gets a little bit more, it's a little more sketchy. So when I first booted up the Switch 1 version, it instantly looked different than on the Switch 2 version. I played the Switch 1 undocked, and I'm still showing you Switch 2 footage. I didn't capture my Switch 1 gameplay, but I played the Switch 1 undocked in handheld mode, and the version, and for some reason it had like a super dark screen. At the beginning you can like adjust your contrast or your gamma, and I guess for some reason by default the Switch 1 version was just super dark. Maybe it was a glitch because I put up the brightness and it wasn't that bad, but I don't know if it was just me or if it was just that first load of the game. But yeah, it was a super dark screen to the point where I actually couldn't see much. But there was also a pretty big glitch that happened as well. I was getting chased by the goofy guy, and I guess the world didn't load fast enough, and I fell into this void, and the game completely froze on me. I didn't get jump scared. I couldn't click the plus button. I couldn't move at all. The only thing that was working was if I clicked the right stick, the whole console would vibrate, but I was soft locked. I couldn't do anything. I had to literally close the game and reopen it again, and then that's when it worked properly. But even then, you can tell kind of the world around you, the levels just don't load in as fast. And that issue that I had with the Switch 2 loading in, like if I'm creeping in with the door, this also had that, but it was much more apparent. Things just didn't load in as fast. And speaking of loading, another issue with the Switch 1 version is the load times are much longer than on the Switch 2. Now this goes without saying for a lot of the Switch games that are played on Switch 2. The Switch 2 can just handle these better, and it inherently just runs most games better. Load times are generally shorter, frame rate is more locked, and that's exactly what we're seeing here on Secret of the Mimic. Also on the Switch 1, there was an occasional frame rate drop. It wasn't bad by any means though, like absolutely playable, just not, as solid as the Switch 2 version. But overall, these are both very playable versions of the game. I would say it's probably going to go on sale at some point, so maybe hold off on it for now. If you've waited this long, you can probably wait a little bit longer. I'm kind of disappointed that there's no dedicated Nintendo Switch 2 edition of the game. I don't know why that's not the case. They already put the work into downscaling it so much. Why not just stop halfway and throw it on the Switch 2? You know what I mean? Maybe it's more work than I make it seem, but they already have a very quality current gen console version of the game on PS5, and they could just put that, you could just bring it down a little bit for the Nintendo Switch 2. Even if they just ported the Series S version of the game onto the Switch 2, it would that's pretty much fine. The Switch 2 and the Xbox Series S run very similarly, so I don't know why they wouldn't. So like I said at the beginning, I'm disappointed I wasn't able to add this section of my discussion into my main dedicated video on the Five Nights at Freddy's series, and it was really just a punch in the neck because they really couldn't have just at least told us before they dropped it. I could have waited a little bit longer. Yeah, that was disappointing. But anyways, overall, it's a good time. I'm going to keep playing it on the Switch 2. And yeah, let me know if you even know about this version at all. If you decided to play it or pick it up and what you think about it. So I hope you have a good rest of your day. Like and subscribe if you want to do that. That would be very nice. And I would love you. I do love you right now. So thank you all for watching. I hope you have a good rest of your day. I'll see you in the next one. See you later.